We've all taken a long road trip, right? We've all seen that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we can hold out for another 20 minutes before stopping for a bathroom break or stretching a bit. Sometimes you're lucky and find one of those huge rest areas, with big buildings, food, and everything else, but most of the time, depending on where you are, you'll have to settle for a small area with just a tiny building for bathrooms, nothing more. Well, I had been driving for several hours, on a trip that would take 15 hours in total, and a good portion of that drive was at night. I won't say from where to where, because I don't think it matters, but I can say I was in a more isolated area of the east coast of the United States. It was late, and I was trying to keep going without stopping too much. There weren't many cars on the road at that hour. In fact, it was pretty rare to see other cars around. I was getting to that point in the trip where I needed to stop, and I was getting irritated by how long I'd been sitting in the car. I started looking for a rest area sign, and when I saw that blue sign, it felt like salvation. So, a few miles later, I pulled in. It was a small area, but there was a building with bathrooms, and for me, that was more than enough. There were no trucks parked, and I think they can only stop in their designated areas, but there was another car in the lot. I figured someone was probably sleeping inside. I got out of my car, stretched a bit, and as I walked toward the bathroom, I glanced at the other car in the parking lot. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't tell if anyone was inside or not. But it wasn't something that worried me too much at the moment. I was just curious. I walked into the bathroom and found myself in a strange scene. There was a man in the corner of the restroom, his head down and his back turned toward me. At first, I thought he was using the toilet, but then I realized he wasn't even facing the nearest one. He was just standing there, staring at the wall. I paused for a moment, unsure if I should say something. I considered asking if he was okay, but the situation was just too weird. I still had to walk past him to get into the stall, and honestly, I was a little scared to walk so close to him. I tried to stay unnoticed and walk calmly. I stepped into the stall and locked the door. But I have to admit, I couldn't use the bathroom with him in the room. I'm one of those people who just can't. It was too quiet, too strange. I stood there for a minute, trying to focus, but I couldn't. In the end, I flushed the toilet anyway and stepped out of the stall. But now, the man had turned around. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was staring at me. His eyes. He was the creepiest man I had ever seen. There was something about his face, especially around the eyes, that gave me the strangest feeling. His expression was completely empty. I hadn't spoken to anyone in over 10 hours, and this encounter caught me completely off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and walked out of the restroom. I headed to my car and wasted no time starting it and pulling away. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking toward my car. I stepped on the gas to get out of his sight as fast as possible. I felt relieved to be back on the main road. However, that was the only relief I had. I still needed to go to the bathroom. I figured it was just a matter of 20 minutes before reaching the next rest area. I could make it. I was right. It was about 20 minutes before I reached the next area. It was another one very similar to the first. Like I said earlier, many of these places are practically identical. There were no cars in this one. Thankfully. I parked right in front of the bathroom and rushed inside. I have to say, I felt much better immediately after. As I was finishing, I heard footsteps enter. I thought they would stop at the sinks, but they stopped right outside my stall. I could see shoes through the gap under the door. The man was standing almost completely still right behind the door. My first thought was that it was the man from the first rest area. He had followed me. My social anxiety stopped me from saying anything at first, until I managed to mumble, "Is someone there?" No response. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was call 911 and put it on speakerphone so the man could hear the operator answer, "911, what's your emergency?" I clearly stated that I felt threatened by a dangerous man, and the operator asked for details on my location. I responded loudly, making sure the man could hear my voice clearly. Thankfully, it worked. I heard footsteps retreat as the man left the restroom. The operator asked if I felt safe, and I decided to stay put until the police arrived. A knock on the door told me I could come out. I described the man and the car I had seen at the first rest stop. The creepy encounter in the first bathroom and the even weirder one in the second. We checked my car to see if it had been tampered with. After making sure the man was gone, the officer and I left the rest area together. Then he turned onto another road. The rest of my trip was normal, but man, that night was truly terrifying. I had never been followed before. And now I'm almost 100% sure that the man behind the door was the same guy I had seen in the first bathroom. It's even stranger because I'm a man, and these things usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can happen to anyone. After my last breakup, I was forced to move back in with my family. I had been living with my ex in an apartment in Chicago, but I learned the hard way that signing a lease with someone you've just started dating is never a good idea. He wasn't at all the person I thought he was. My parents live in a small town in Illinois, much quieter than Chicago. I've never been the small town type. I prefer being close to a big urban center, especially at my age. But here, I'm bored out of my mind. I hope to stay just long enough to find an apartment I can afford on my own. I'll definitely avoid Chicago for obvious reasons. I took my old job back at an urgent care center. They welcomed me back with enthusiasm, even though they know it's only temporary. The only issue is that I have to cover the most inconvenient shifts, often overnight. The hours drag, and even though the job isn't hard, it completely disrupts my sleep-wake cycle and my already limited social life. When I finish my shift, I usually grab something to eat for what would technically be my dinner. There aren't many options open at that hour, but this morning, I got off at 4 and decided to stop by a diner that serves breakfast starting at that time. I got a chicken sandwich and a salad to eat comfortably at home. I also had to fill up. I stopped at the gas station along the way home, one of the few open at night. The parking lot is huge, but I rarely see other cars there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a few bucks, then returned to the pump. Meanwhile, a car had stopped not far from me, a blue sedan. A man got out just as I was starting to fill up. He blocked the pump handle to let the gas flow automatically, then walked over to my side. "Wanna see a fun trick?" he asked me. I immediately hated that interaction, but for some reason, I replied, "What trick?" He started doing that stupid finger trick, pretending to pull one off with the other hand. He kept looking at his hands and then at me with a sarcastic expression. I couldn't tell if he was serious or just joking. I laughed awkwardly to make him stop, but he kept going. Even when I looked away, he didn't stop. Finally, I heard the click of the pump indicating the tank was full. I quickly unhooked the nozzle and ran inside to grab the rest. When I came back outside, the man was gone, but his car was still there, and the gas was still flowing. I didn't want to stick around to see where he went. I got in my car, and out of paranoia, I checked the back seats to make sure no one was there. I locked the doors and drove off. 5 minutes later, I was home, eager to eat my 4:30 a.m. meal. I grabbed the spare key from its hiding place, unlocked the door, and put it back in its spot. I locked the door behind me, as I always do when I come in. I went straight to the kitchen to eat, trying not to make any noise to avoid waking my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's. I didn't need a car in Chicago, but since I came back, I've been using the spare key to get inside. While I was eating, I heard the front door open and close. I froze, food still in my mouth. I called out softly, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. I didn't hear footsteps. I ran to the entrance to check. No one was there. My heart was pounding in my throat. I quickly ran upstairs to my parents' room and burst through the door. They were both in bed and woke up abruptly from the noise. In a low but terrified voice, I said, "Someone just came into the house." My dad jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. I followed cautiously. He turned on all the lights as we moved through the rooms. Then he went outside to check the spare key. It was gone. My mom was freaked out, but she still found the time to scold me for not checking better before putting it back in its place. My dad started searching the house, room by room. When he finished checking my older brother's room, he went outside to continue the search, leaving the light on. I stayed there and decided to check a few corners he might have missed, though I wasn't really expecting to find anyone. I looked under the bed and in the closet. Nothing. I went back downstairs. My dad was already checking the basement. Even with him down there, I definitely didn't want to go down. But curiosity got the best of me. I went into the dining room, next to the entrance. I kneeled down and looked under the table. And there he was. He didn't seem real. It was the guy from the gas station, curled up under the table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed with all my might, and my mom started screaming too. My dad rushed upstairs, ready to fight. The man crawled out from under the table and tried to free himself from my dad's hold, who was at least 20 years older than him. Seeing my dad overwhelmed, my mom and I started hitting the intruder with everything we had. Only when we were all over him did he decide to flee through the front door. We immediately called the police, who arrived quickly. But that man still had our house key. That night, the officers left a patrol car in our driveway to discourage him from coming back. My dad blocked the door with a chair and slept in the living room. The next day, he changed the locks, and my parents stopped hiding a key outside the house forever. I feel guilty for bringing that man here and for my own distraction. But I'm convinced he followed me with the lights off, because I didn't see anyone behind me in the car. Now, I want to leave even more. I like driving at night because there's nothing I hate more than traffic. I live in Chicago, and traffic here can be unbearable, especially during rush hours. My cousin lives in Dallas, and I often visit him. The trip is long, lasting up to 15 hours depending on traffic and stops. I usually leave around 2 in the morning to avoid the worst congestion. That Thursday night, I had everything planned. I refueled, grabbed a coffee from a vending machine, and hit the road, ready for the long journey. Once I left Chicago, the drive was smooth. I-55 was practically empty, and the silence of the night was almost relaxing. Around 4 in the morning, I started feeling hungry. I decided to exit the highway at the first service area with an open fast food restaurant. I saw a sign for a McDonald's and followed the directions. The area was dark, with no streetlights, and seemed rather isolated. The only light came from my car's headlights and the restaurant sign. In the parking lot, there was only one other car, an old dark sedan. The drive-through lights were on, so I assumed it was open. I stopped in front of the intercom, waiting for a response. After a minute of silence, I tried saying, "Excuse me, are you open?" but no one answered. I checked my phone and saw that the place didn't open until 6 in the morning. Just then, 3 knocks on the window made me jump. A man was standing next to my car, smiling. He gestured for me to lower the window. I didn't feel comfortable, so I only rolled it down a few inches. "It's not open," he said. "Yeah, I just found out," I replied. Then he told me his car wouldn't start and asked if I could help jumpstart it. He pointed to the dark sedan and said the battery was dead. I hesitated, but then thought it would be wrong not to help. "I don't have cables," I said. He smiled. "I do, in the trunk." I looked at his car, parked in a corner of the lot near the trees. In the end, I nodded. He stepped aside so I could pull up and align my hood with his. I turned off the engine, popped the hood, and got out. He opened his trunk and took out the cables. We connected them, and I restarted the engine. We waited a few minutes before he tried turning on his car. He moved slowly, as if he wasn't in a hurry. He turned the key, but nothing happened. I told him to wait a bit longer and try again. When he tried again, the engine didn't respond. Strange, considering he had driven there. Then he said he needed to make a call. He walked away, speaking softly in a language I didn't recognize. When he returned, he said a friend advised him to wait a little longer. I nodded, hoping this wouldn't drag on too much. But suddenly, I heard the roar of 2 engines in the distance. 2 pickup trucks were approaching fast, one from each side of the building. My heart started pounding. I immediately knew something was wrong. I muttered a curse and began disconnecting the cables as fast as I could, but it was already too late. The 2 pickups stopped behind me, blocking my car. I looked at the man next to me, his smile had changed. Now it looked sinister, full of dark intentions. I bolted toward the woods, feeling branches scratch my legs as I ran through the darkness. I tripped over something and fell to the ground. I decided to stay still, curling up as much as possible. I heard voices calling each other. There were more than 3 men. My breathing was heavy, my heart pounding in my chest. After a few minutes, the voices faded. I thought it was over until I heard my car alarm blaring in the distance. I waited a few minutes before creeping back, moving low to the ground. When I reached the parking lot, only my car was left. The other vehicles were gone. I walked up and saw the rear window shattered. The trunk was open. All my stuff was gone, clothes, shoes, my laptop, even a bag with some important documents. I felt empty. I called the police and reported everything. The officers said they would check the McDonald's security cameras, but the vehicles likely had no plates. After filing my report, they told me I could head home. I was more than 2 hours from Chicago. I backed out and drove away. It was the heaviest, most disheartening drive of my life. A few days later, the police called me back. The sedan in the parking lot had a fake plate, and the two pickups had no identifying marks. "We'll do our best," they said. But I knew, they would never find them. My belongings were gone forever. I believe in karma, and I hope those bastards got what they deserved.